Wednesday morning. What's up, everybody? Welcome to Fantasy Football today. We have people waiting for us in our YouTube room, youtube.com/fantasy football today. And they're guessing who's going to be on the show. Only a couple people are guessing right now. Ben says, what's the lineup going to be? Matt says, I'm going to guess Azer, Dave, and a guest appearance by a baked burger. And then Ben says, Azer, Jamie, and Dave day. Well, it's a Dan Schneier day. He's joining me and Jamie today. Dan, you ready to talk about wide receiver tiers?
I am, and I'm also ready to announce to the world that's listening today and you that I never really fully gave you your due for this baked burger take that you brought to Twitter. What was that, a couple weeks ago? Just a horrific take. Just putting burgers in an oven. I just can't even imagine a worse way to eat a burger. And yet, according to you, it was great.
I think you did actually roast me for that already, but thank you for doing it again. So here's a little theme for this year that's worth watching. So I always use, when I go back in time and I look at previous year's ADP, I use fantasyfootballcalculator.com. It's pretty good. It's not great, I think, right now for the current season, but for previous years, I think it makes a lot of sense. It's like, oh, this looks like normal ADP. So over the past 5 years, there have been 14 to 15 running backs taken in the first 2 rounds. In 4 of those years, 1 year it was 12, but 12 to 15 every year, and usually 14 to 15. 3 straight years, 14 to 15 running backs in the first 2 rounds. Here are the wide receivers drafted in the first 2 rounds over the last 5 years, according to Fantasy Football Calculator. This is PPR. Non-PPR, probably even more skewed, but PPR. 9, 10, 6, 7, 8. Want to just look at the last 3 years? You're talking 14 to 15 running backs, 6 to 8 wide receivers in the first 2 rounds. Jamie, I looked at a few sources this morning. NFC, Draft Sharks, FantasyData.com. NFC is very averse to drafting running backs, I guess, in the first 2 rounds. But on Draft Sharks and Fantasy Data, 10 running backs, 11 wide receivers in the first 24 picks. And then you've got Kelsey and 2 quarterbacks, I guess, but 10 running backs, 11 wide receivers, much more even than, it's kind of almost like a landslide of running backs winning. It's really early. It's July 19th, but do you think that's going to hold up, a more balanced running back versus wide receiver rather than running backs clearly winning in the first 2 rounds in terms of ADP?
I'm looking at the draft we did yesterday. I just counted 11 wide receivers went in the first 2 rounds, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 running backs went in the second round. So very much on par. So yes, I think this
went in the first 2 rounds.
First 2 rounds, and 11 wide receivers went in the first 2 rounds as well, with 3 quarterbacks and 1 tight end. So I think that's probably something we're going to see a lot of. Yes, somewhat of an even split. I'm really more curious, though, about the first round as opposed to the second round, because that's, I think, where we're going to see more wide receivers, because it's how many running backs, we talked about this yesterday, how many running backs are really going to go in the first round. And again, NFC is going to be very different than I think what a lot of drafts actually are. But I think the first round running back locks are going to be McCaffrey, Eckler, Bijan, for now Taylor, and maybe Barkley, and that's it. And then the rest, I think, are going to be wide receivers and Kelsey.
I feel like I've seen Taylor even slipping into the early second round.
Yeah. But I think will end up happening with the holdout. Yep. With Barkley holding out in camp, you'll see Taylor move ahead of him.
Yeah, and it's going to kind of it's going to change the perspective on a lot of things, because, if you're thinking usually, well, round 3 is a good round for wide receivers, or 4 or 5, it may not be, and it's deeper into the wide receiver pool. That's the point, right? It's deeper into the wide receiver pool this year.
I think we're going to see more receivers in that first, second round range as we get through draft season. The reason I say this is a conversation I had with Heath on the Dynasty podcast yesterday. We think that we might have gotten to a point where we've pushed the dead zone narrative so far that now that these running backs that we used to take in round 1, and they used to be pushed up into round 2, borderline round 2, round 3, are now going in that 3 through 5 range, and they're actually value plays. And a lot of spots, these running backs that I'm getting in round 3, 4, 5, especially 4 and 5, are good value. And because of that, it's making me, every time I do, like yesterday we had a PPR mock, I did a running back build to start. I regretted it immediately, because when I got to rounds 3, 4, 5, I wanted a running back over receiver every single time. And I'm like, I don't want a third running back before I get my second receiver. I don't want a fourth running back before I get my third, whatever it may be. So I looked at it like, I can't do that ever again. I can't go running back again.
I think you recovered well.
It was okay. Yeah.
So the story will be up on the site, and this is actually the premise of what I wrote about, was because you did it, I did it, and Chris Towers did it. We all started running back, which is not something I think you're going to see, from that many managers even anymore. 3 managers going running back. And I think the way that you recovered is different than the way Chris and I did. And I say recovered, like as if it's a problem, but like we were able to get receivers or try to chase receivers because you took a receiver in the 3rd round.
Right.
Chris and I did not. I took Mark Andrews. Chris took Lamar Jackson. So we even took it a step further. I took it even a step further than that because I took Aaron Jones in round 4. So
I just started taking wide receivers. Reaching a little bit? I felt like I was reaching a bit with Ridley in round 3.
Yes and no. I think, again, this is where I think we're going to start to see the shift. And this is, I think, what you stabbed with running backs. And now we're starting to see it with wide receivers, is that when you got to the 3rd round, you didn't have a second running back. You're like, oh, my God, I have to take a running back here. And I think we're seeing it even with second wide receivers because people like to have a heavy wide receiver build in PPR. But also if you're taking your first guy. So we had this conversation yesterday that round 3, we're going to see a handful of wide receivers. The top end guys, I think, the beginning of round 3, which we'll get into, Devontae Smith and T. Higgins. And, I put Chris Olave in that group, but he probably belongs in the second group. But still, I think Olave is, the guy that sort of is the bridge. We talk about this a lot. Who's the guy that goes from one group to the next or one tier to the next? I think Olave is that guy for this group. But then it's that next group of guys, which is going to be Calvin Ridley, Keenan Allen in PPR, maybe still DK Metcalf, maybe still Deebo Samuel, maybe Amari Cooper sneaks into that group, depending on how it goes. But that's the group where it feels kind of icky, and that's where it's like, okay, do I want to really take these guys in this spot? And I think in your case, because you went running back, it's fine. You have to sort of reach a little bit to get one of these guys that could still be top 12. And I think those guys are all in that category. It's when you're not necessarily, it's when you're taking them as your second receiver because you feel like, oh, I have to have 2 receivers. That's where I feel like is a little bit of a reach. Like, why are you doing that when you don't necessarily have to? And in the case of people that like to go 0 RB or modified 0 RB, and they go receiver there, it's great to have that guy as your third. But again, it feels like you're just drafting them a little bit too soon, which I think is where the problem sort of lies.
Okay. Well, we'll get into the tiers. And I think one thing we're making very clear this year, on yesterday's show, we hammered it. Dan talked about it. He didn't even listen to yesterday's show because he's selfish, but he talked about it already today. Running back, in the middle rounds, 4 through 6, basically, not bad this year. Pretty, different. Just it looks different this year. It feels different this year. Now, I think we got to spend a lot of time between now, July 19th, and early August when we really get into it, examining that and saying, is it really different? Because how many times did we fall for, let's say, the mid-round tight end trap? And year after year, oh, no, this time these guys are going to be good. And then it took us maybe 3 years of failure before we realized, okay, the mid-round tight ends, we get excited about them every year, and most of them just don't come through. So I wonder if we're setting ourselves up for a little bit of a
but
yeah.
I think the difference, though, with that is you're talking about usually 3 guys.
Yeah. But we've liked mid-round running backs in the past, too. And then, not
a group like this, though. This is different.
It feels more robust. I hope.
It feels different. I don't know if it is. It definitely feels different.
It's more robust. And again, we're usually, with these mid-round running backs, we're talking about guys that were typically starting to be ranked, let's say, as high as maybe 17, 18. You're getting guys that are ranked, depending on whatever rank list you look at, 12.
Yeah.
Well, in what round are you talking about?
4?
I don't think you're getting RB12 in round 4.
I have Jahmyr Gibbs ranked 12th. Aaron Jones is in that range. Najee Harris is in that range. So they're starting to go mid round 3, maybe. Okay, extending a little bit. J.K. Dobbins. I mean, again, maybe I have these guys ranked too high. Ken Walker. Some people have him ranked a little higher. Obviously, Breece Hall. Depending on where he's being ranked. That's where these range of guys are going to go. I think that's where, okay, so maybe it's not 12, maybe it's 14.
No, it's the tier. It's the tier that includes
I'll tell you what the biggest difference for me is so far drafting with these rounds 3 through 5 backs that Jamie's referring to. I actually feel for the first time when I'm taking guys like Jahmyr Gibbs and Breece Hall and J.K. Dobbins, like these guys could actually be league winner type picks for me versus the receivers at the exact same time that I don't feel like that. And that's never been the case for me. It's always been the opposite. It's always been, I'm never taking this running back here. We're just pushing him up because he has touches, or we're pushing up because of this and that. And I don't really see too much of a clear path other than situation. But now I'm like, talent is meeting situation with Breece Hall, Jahmyr Gibbs, J.K. Dobbins versus receiver, where I'm like, yeah, he's a talented option, but he doesn't even have a great situation. Like, I don't even see the target path here. So that's what's really surprised me the most. Like when we were talking about guys like, Myles Gaskin and Mike Davis and stuff, it's such a different story to me than Breece Hall and J.K. Dobbins types.
All right, guys, let's move on here. We'll get into the wide receiver tiers in a bit. We have a few news items, all of them about running backs, not very appropriate for today's show. Let me tell you first about the Draft-a-thon. It's already well underway. We'll continue through the end of August. It's our charitable drive that we do every year to raise money for St. Jude. Let's raise 6 figures this year. Let's crush that, okay? And one item you can bid on right now at tinyurl.com/FFT donate is a spot in the podcast league. If you're listening to this on Wednesday, you've got 1 day left. Thursday at 4 p.m., this item closes. tinyurl.com/FFT donate and a spot in the podcast league. Right now, it's going for $1,925. That would be a terrific amount. We're so appreciative of anything that you're willing to give. If you want to outbid that to get in the podcast league, a 14-team PPR league, draft is, I believe it's August 28th at 8 o'clock. That is in the details on eBay, which you'll be redirected to at that URL I've been giving. We love you for it. Thank you so much for donating to the cause. Another thing you can do that we love you for is nominate us on podcastawards.com. Go there now, podcastawards.com. We are nominated in 2 categories: Best Male Host in Podcast.
Oh, again.
Best Male Hosted Podcast.
Like 8th year running for Adam with Best Male Podcast Host.
Best Male Hosted Podcast. And Best Sports Podcast. So go to those 2 categories and People's Choice if you want as well.
There's 3. Yeah, what are you doing?
We're not going to win People's Choice.
Why? What do you mean we're not going to win People's Choice?
You know what? We're going to win People's Choice.
What? This is why you don't win Best Male Host Podcast. It's because you don't promote the show that you're on to win.
I did. All right. People's Choice, Best Male Hosted Podcast, and Sports Podcast. Fantasy Football Today on podcastawards.com. On to the news and notes. So Kendre Miller, rookie running back for the New Orleans Saints. He's on the PUP list. He's got recovering from a torn meniscus. He can be taken off of that at any point during training camp. If you're on the PUP list to start the season, you're going to miss some time. But a lot of guys are going to start the year on the PUP list. But, Jamie, it is kind of interesting. We haven't talked much about it. If Kendre Miller is on the PUP list for a while, he's a rookie, maybe that means Jamal Williams is a great 0 RB target. What do you think?
Well, especially when we get the news about Alvin Kamara, to whatever extent it is. No suspension, 2 games, 4 games, 6 games. It's going to depend, when you're drafting. And so, obviously, Scott Fishbowl leagues and best ball leagues and, any type of maybe, moves you may be looking at in dynasty or long-term keeper leagues to maybe trade for one of those guys after your rookie draft. I think it just, this is a big boost potentially for Jamal Williams, because he's going to get an opportunity regardless of Kamara's situation and regardless of Miller's situation. If both are not there to start the season, he's a starter week 1 for sure.
Clifton Brown of BaltimoreRavens.com said the Ravens are going to try to get J.K. Dobbins more involved in the passing game, and that's cool. And then I wish I could remember. I've been trying to find it where I saw it. That Tank Bigsby, Jaguars running back, that they've been impressed with his work in the passing game.
Not only have they been impressed with his work in the passing game, did you see the note from the Jaguars running backs coach?
No.
So it was a pretty cool coach speak. He I don't have it exactly in front of me, but he basically said, this is the exact guy we're bringing in. It feels like exactly what we need to fit the offense. He said this was one of those rare times where I was going over the tape and I had to reverse, and rewatch the plays over and over and over with Bigsby. And I was like, yes, that's the guy. Put 2 stars on him. So I thought that was interesting.
Did you say the Jaguars running backs coach? How dare you disrespect Bernie Parmalee? You don't know his name?
Hey, Bernie Parmalee. That was a blast from the past. Isaiah Pacheco also has a hand injury and might start training camp on the PUP list. But back to the Jaguars.
That's very sneaky for Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
I agree with that. And I just snagged him like 15th round in Scott Fishbowl.
Yeah. I just want to say I want to spend a little more time in the Jaguars here because, is this a threat to Travis Etienne?
In the same article, they said Travis Etienne will still be the lead back. He's still expected to be.
I know he'll be the lead back, but to what degree? I mean,
I think
I think. Look, Dan's been talking about this for most of the offseason. They needed to bring in somebody to help Travis Etienne to whatever degree it was, or whatever degree it will be. Whether it's just giving a 5% snap decrease or 10% or 20%. I don't think they want to run him into the ground because they've already seen him suffer a foot injury in his rookie campaign. He was a little bit banged up last year in the middle of the season. That Baltimore game, he had to leave. And so what were they going to do to supplement him? And this is a guy, I happen to know the guy who trained him, that Bigsby has a huge ceiling in front of him for these mid-round running backs, based on NFL draft capital. And so it's a great landing spot. So when we talk about lottery tickets, this is the perfect lottery ticket that you want to draft because he will get some opportunities. And we'll see how they work these guys in together. First off, look, he has to beat out Dearness Johnson and Snoop Connor and the other guys that are there. So that's a big part of it also. But, from a talent perspective, he should. And then it's, okay, if ETN does miss any time, we say this, year after year, who's a league-winning type of guy? This is going to be a great offense. And so you want to have backups on great offenses.
Right.
Elijah Mitchell, Jerome Ford, Jalen Warren, I still think qualifies for this. Tank Bigsby qualifies for this. These are guys that you just put on your bench, and if they hit, my gosh, you could win your league. You can flip your league on its head because of where you draft these guys. So put him in the back of your mind and take him with a late round pick, and then just go back to Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Similar situation. This was a guy that averaged his first 4 games last year 18 plus PPR points per game. This is a great situation. We know it's not going to be Kareem Hunt in his tenure with the Chiefs. It's not going to be Jamal Charles. They're going to mix and match guys. Jerick McKinnon's going to have opportunities. But first and second down rushing chances are not going to Jerick McKinnon if Isaiah Pacheco's not there. They're going to Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And so while the narrative is, yes, they wasted the pick and he should not have gotten his 5th-year option picked up, those things are all true. But fantasy-wise, he could still have a very big impact on this Chiefs offense and for fantasy managers if he starts any games.
Okay, we're going to take a break here. When we come back, Jamie gives his wide receiver tiers and hashtag Dan on the can reacts. We'll be right back on Fantasy Football Today. We're into our wide receiver tiers. Here's a teaser. I vehemently disagree with Jamie's tier 2.
Oh,
yeah, I know.
What do you
right?
disagree with?
Oh, you'll see. Can we do tier 1 first?
All right.
It's called a teaser. You don't ask me to follow up on the teaser. You let me tease.
You're right. That was a terrible by me. Okay, go on.
All right, wide receiver tier number 1. It's not 3. It's 4. Jamie, who's in tier 1?
Tier 1 is Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Cooper Kupp, and Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, so it's the 3 that you'd expect, and then Tyreek Hill. You want to expand on why you included Tyreek Hill there?
Well, I mean, first off, he's guaranteeing 2,000 yards, and that's never gone wrong. So I just think you look at what his body of work has been and what he did last year with a healthy Tua Tagovailoa, and still very productive even when Tua was not there. He's the one guy that sort of survived the backups there, unlike Jalen Waddle. So, I mean, you see it. You see if you're watching the screen on YouTube, 4 guys that averaged over 20 PPR points per game. And I just think his role in this offense, the amount of targets he will get, what Tua's expected to play like this year, again, if he stays healthy. But I also think Mike White is a better backup than what they had a year ago, mostly because Teddy Bridgewater was hurt. But I think these are the 4 guys that are going to be drafted in the first round. They should be drafted in, probably the first 8 picks. And, they're I've seen several drafts, to some degree, a little surprised, to some degree, I understand it, where Tyreek Hill has gone ahead of Cooper Kupp, and so I wouldn't do that. I don't think we would collectively, but you can certainly make an argument based on what happened to both these guys last year and their quarterback situations. As bad as Tua's health scenario is, it's equally as bad for Matthew Stafford with his back.
Yeah, I'm just going to tell you, if you look at the games that Tua did not leave early, just the healthy Tua games, and you look at Tyreek Hill's 17-game pace over those games, I believe he would have scored 4 fewer fantasy points than Justin Jefferson scored. So he was almost the same exact player, about 40 fewer yards, 11 fewer catches, but 2 more touchdowns. Actually, though, I'm not including Justin Jefferson's rushing touchdown. So it would have been more like 10 or 11 fewer fantasy points than Jefferson.
Edited the hell out of that one.
What's that? Okay,
I just edited the hell out of that.
Not on purpose. Yeah. All right, tier 2. This terrible tier. You ready, Dan? This is it. I'm going to shred Jamie's tiers. Okay. Well, I want to know what you think. Tier 2 is a big tier. It's 6 players: Diggs, Lamb, St. Brown, A.J. Brown, Garrett Wilson, and Devontae Adams. Diggs, Lamb, St. Brown, A.J. Brown, Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams. What do you think?
I'm pretty so first of all, for me, my tier 1 would be just Jefferson Chase, and then my tier 2 would be Cup, Hill, and Diggs. So it's a little bit different there. But after that, I would have so let's just call this tier 2 for me. I think the drop off for me would come after AJ Brown, and then I would leave out Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams from this tier. I also might have Jalen Waddle up in the mix here for this tier, because I really like Jalen Waddle, but I don't hate this. I don't see what your problem could be with this. This is pretty fine, with the exception of maybe pushing up Wilson a little bit, which I'm fine with. But Adams scares me. But there's still 170 target potential there, so I kind of get it. But what really bothers you about this tier? I don't see anything too off.
I think Diggs is a cut above.
Okay,
Brown and AJ.
He would have been. Yes, he would have been in the tier above with me too, with those back three.
And
but other than that,
interesting. So basically, when I look at Diggs, Lamb, St. Brown, AJ Brown, Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams,
okay,
Jamie, there are two who have shown the ability to be first round players, and that's Diggs and Adams. Lamb is like probably doesn't have 1,700 yard upside or anything, but he's so solid.
What if Amon-Ra St. Brown wasn't tackled at the 117 times last year?
I don't know. I mean, the thing about St. Brown is that did he even have 1,200 yards last year? He's just not an alpha number one outside guy
he's I don't 100 catch guy though.
He is, but I don't think he has 1,400 yard potential.
I don't either.
So I don't know. I just feel like I don't think Diggs and St. Brown are particularly close. It might be a stupid thing to say at the end of the year, but for me, if I have Diggs and St. Brown on the clock at the same time, it's not. In fact, if I have Diggs or any of these other five.
Oh no, this isn't a draft conversation though. This is a tier conversation, and so there's got to be somebody at the top of a tier and then somebody at the bottom of the tier. And so, again, the way that I approach this, I said this yesterday. It was more sort of where am I drafting these guys, and just me personally. So Diggs is a second round guy for me. Borderline first round, second round guy, depending on how you take running backs. I have no problem taking the first round. But I kind of grouped it that way. And so you could even go back to, the graphic just because I'm looking at it here. There were 4 guys that averaged over 20 PPR points per game. He's just below that threshold. So that's why. And I think, the thing that concerns me a little bit is he starting to get to that point where maybe he's going to tick down a little bit, not fall off, but start to tick down a little bit, just based on his age and what we're seeing with, his production. So he's amazing. I mean, there's no doubt about it, but he's the top of the second tier for me as opposed to the end of the first tier.
I don't know how you feel about this. One of the ways I look at tiers, at least this early in the draft, is let's put some running backs in there, right? And which of these wide receivers am I definitely taking over the running back that's going in that range? So that might be Tony Pollard, at least in our drafts. Tony Pollard, Josh Jacobs, Nick Chubb, right? And I would take them over Amon-Ra St. Brown. It might depend on who I took in the first. I don't know if how you feel about that, and it's not so concrete. It's kind of tough, but
so if I was really going to do this and give you 15 tiers, it would have been Diggs and Lamb in their own tier.
Okay. Let me ask you this: if you were going to break this tier out into upside, if you're going to separate them based on upside, how would you do that?
Diggs still has the most. Diggs and Wilson probably would be the top of that.
Don't forget about Devontae Adams. I know he's not on the graphic you're seeing.
Yeah.
I would say they all have upside aside from Devontae Adams.
You don't I think Adams kind of right with Amon-Ra St. Brown. As much as I love him, I don't know if he's as much of an upside play as a floor, a type play. Like
I'm very curious though, because and we've talked about this, and I know how you feel about it, Dan, that what is Ben Johnson going to do in those first 6 games without Jameson Williams? Right. Now no DJ Chark. I know Marvin Jones is there, but this is a guy that's in his early 30s at this point. Sam Laporta's there, different player from last year, and clearly Jahmyr Gibbs. But is Marvin Jones going to be their field stretcher and only guy in that role? Or does now Amon-Ra St. Brown play a little bit of a different role to start the season? And he's great at getting open. Clearly he's better suited to play the slot. I think we all agree on that. But how does Ben Johnson sort of get through those first 6 games until maybe in what Adam feels is like the alpha shows up from a outside receiver standpoint? I don't think he takes more targets from Amon-Ra St. Brown, but I think the offense is going to be very interesting to see through the beginning part of the season. So I don't know if Amon-Ra St. Brown's role changes at all, But if it does, maybe the numbers are a little bit different those first 6 games.
The role change would help him. Obviously, him not getting tackled to one so often would help him. But the biggest difference for me from an upside standpoint with Amon-Ra St. Brown versus the rest of this list is I don't know if I see big play touchdowns coming from him.
That's exactly it. Exactly.
And that the rest of the group, I think, can do that.
Yeah.
And that's probably the biggest difference for me.
So if he gets 7 short area touchdowns, those are
right. They count
less
count
than
for the same.
12 touchdown potential. I would say no. I would say probably
no, but I think you're talking about a 100 catch guy. What he does with his yards on top of that, and then if he can get to 10 touchdowns, that would be a huge year.
He just reminds me so much of Keenan Allen, who has been one of the most
nuts.
I think that's fair.
Terrific, and it's terrific. It just I would not put Keenan Allen even in his prime
ever being with the elite chance of being a wide receiver one, right?
Right, yeah. Exactly. I don't know that Keenan Allen's ever finished higher than like wide receiver 7.
Yeah,
and he's usually around 12 per game. But that's fine.
Which is good. You want that on your team.
I didn't mean to quibble and bog this down.
I get it.
I was just trying to be fun, but
Adams is the one that scares me the most. I'm very nervous about the Adams situation, from Jimmy's injury to the fact that I feel like we love Adams because he had that great year with Raiders last year, but then you look at it and it's like, well, he was targeted insane amount from an air yard standpoint in the deep game, and I have no idea where that's. And that was because Derek Carr was just in F it mode, and he was just like, I'm just throwing it downfield. I do not see that happening with any quarterback on that roster right now. So I think he's just all short targets, and I'm just like, do I want a bunch of crappy short targets on a team that's probably not scoring a lot?
And again, I'll go back to this, and I know Adam's gonna, say he's in the elite tier of guys that should probably be able to do this. But when receivers turn 30 and you're asking them to be at a certain level, there's only been 17 guys in 10 years to average 15 points per game or higher, and only 3 in that same span have done it at the level that Adams did it last year at 19 points per game or more. Now, again, if he slips to 17, you'll still be okay with that, because I think that's the range of guys you're looking at in round 2. But it's just everything that's just being stacked against Davante Adams is the concern. So that's I'm with you as well. That's why he's at the bottom of the tier for me.
All right, tier 3: Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, T. Higgins, and Chris Olave. Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, T. Higgins, Chris Olave. If I talked about the stretch of Tyreek Hill and Tua. How about those same 12 games, Jalen Waddle and Tua? He scored enough fantasy points per game to be, I think, the number 4. Oh, no. Yeah, it's a little bit different. Sorry. Number 8 wide receiver. There was a better stretch for him before Jalen Waddle got hurt, because he was slowed down a little bit toward the end of the season. Anyway, tier 3 is Waddle, Devontae Smith, T. Higgins, and Chris Olave. And Jamie, are these guys suitable number 1 wide receivers if you do wait until early round 3 to take one?
Yes, I think the only problem with that is where they're going. It's probably the only way you're going to take them as your number 1 wide receiver is if you probably took Christian McCaffrey with your first pick, and then maybe took a tight end, took Mark Andrews. I shouldn't say tight end, took Mark Andrews or a quarterback on the swing to start round 2, because I think where these guys are going. But yeah, again, I think you could also see a situation where you take Waddle in the 2nd round and Smith or Higgins in the 3rd round as well. So yeah, they certainly could be. And again, I don't disagree that Waddle could be in the group above him. And Smith was, a star, 136 targets, hard to overlook. I think Higgins was largely disappointing last year for a lot of people, just based on the expectations. But I think you look at still the body of work and what he's been able to accomplish, going into now his 4th year with the quarterback he plays with. These 3 guys to start this list, Olave, the exception, are arguably the best number 2 wide receivers in the league, and they just happen to play with, some pretty big alphas next to them, which kind of, hurts their overall production, I think.
But let me ask you this, because you talked about Dan taking running back, both of you going running back, and you said Dan recovered, and Dan said, I think I reached maybe for Calvin Ridley in round 3, the draft we did yesterday. What if you go McCaffrey in round 1 or Eckler in round 1 or whatever, and then maybe Derrick Henry is there? Like Derrick Henry went 24th in our draft yesterday.
Yep.
Maybe Chubb or one of those guys falls, and you go running back, and then in round 3 you take Waddle, Smith, Higgins, or Olave. They won't all be there, but one of them probably will be there. How do you feel about that start?
It's amazing, and it's the difference between having an early pick and a late pick in the first round, because you have the luxury of, these guys being there early round 3. Right. So it changes the conversation for sure. I think if you're going to go running back, knowing you're going to get one of these two guys. If you go McCaffrey or Eckler, and then you're probably going to end up seeing in the that range in round 2, Nick Chubb, Derrick Henry are probably the two guys that will fall of the upper echelon caliber running backs. Maybe Jacobs starts to get into that range, and who knows Barkley, depending on the holdout and how that pushes those guys down from an ADP standpoint. But yeah, if you know that you can get one of these 4 guys, but even the top 3, because Olave still has to prove it, that's the ideal way to draft if you are inclined to go running back.
So what would you rather do? Would you rather, let's just give you McCaffrey in round 1. And then let's say you get Derrick Henry in round 2, which, looking at different forms of ADP, seems actually pretty realistic. Would you rather have McCaffrey, Henry, and Higgins? I don't think you're going to get Waddle. He's the first one to go in this group. But McCaffrey, Henry, Higgins, Devontae Smith, Olave, one of those 3? Or McCaffrey, let's say Garrett Wilson, and maybe Ramondre Stevenson, Najee Harris, Jahmyr Gibbs, a round 3 running back. Which start do you like better?
I think I prefer that running back start more.
So it's Henry and Olave, Higgins, or Smith versus what did I say? Garrett Wilson?
Garrett Wilson, and then you get like a Ramondre Stevenson.
In this scenario, I would prefer that. But what I would probably do ideally would go McCaffrey, Wilson, Waddle, or McCaffrey, Wilson, Smith.
Yeah.
Take the 2 receivers next. That's the build I prefer more.
Fair enough. Last question about this group here. Do any of these guys have top 5 upside? 1,400 yard, 8 to 10 touchdown kind of season upside?
You're saying without assuming no injury to the
assuming no injuries to quarterbacks, no injuries to wide receivers, no injuries to anyone.
I think Olave would be the only one, but then that would also rely on Michael Thomas getting injured again.
The one that I think, I guess they could. The thing about Waddle is you alluded to this. He was almost right there if Tua had stayed healthy. The thing that's great about the 3 guys here, maybe not so much Higgins because they're with Boyd and with now Irv Smith. We'll see maybe the ball spread around a little bit too much. But Waddle and Smith get so many concentrated targets, especially Waddle and Tyreek Hill. There's not a third guy here in Miami. Yeah. And so that's the thing. It's they're going to get so many opportunities. You could be looking at 250 plus target guys, which is just insane.
Yeah, and so Waddle, I said he was okay. 12 games with a healthy Tua, on pace for 79 catches, 1,514 yards, 11 touchdowns on only 125 targets. Now, the yards and the touchdowns make you think top 5 guy, but the 79 catches, the pace of 79 catches is what made him only, if on that pace, would have only wide receiver 9 per game in full PPR, wide receiver 8 in non-PPR. But like I said, he did suffer through an injury late in the year. Before that, he was blowing away that pace with Tua and actually would have been more like a top 5 guy along with Tyreek Hill. I think it's easiest to see it with Waddle personally. Tier 4 is Calvin Ridley, Keenan Allen, Jerry Jeudy, Amari Cooper, Christian Watson, and Deebo Samuel. It does certainly feel a lot different than tier 3. To me, at least, Jamie, does it feel a lot different to you? Of Ridley, Keenan Allen, Jerry Jeudy, Amari Cooper, Christian Watson, Deebo Samuel.
Yeah, this is the fall off. This is where we start to see, again, the guys that have either age concern in Keenan Allen, target concerns, when you talk about, Cooper now with Elijah Moore there and Deebo Samuel, certainly with the 49ers situation. And the question marks surrounding Calvin Ridley coming back, Jerry Jeudy with Russell Wilson and Christian Watson, but there's still so much upside here. That's the thing. It's like, there's still so much to love about this group. It's just a matter of, do you want them in round 3 or would you just be thrilled to get any of these guys in round 4? And I think that's the conversation is like, if you have to, dip your toe into this pool, and again, I'll throw DK Metcalf in there and maybe even DeAndre Hopkins, depending on how people feel about him. It feels like round 3, or at least the back end of round 3, you're going to have to reach for one of these guys. And that just feels a little icky at this point, knowing that there's still so many question marks about, really the entire group. I end up taking a lot of Calvin Ridley in round 3, and I get criticized for it. Oh my God, you took him again. A lot of these analyst drafts, I get to this point and I'm like, okay, here's my second wide receiver. I hate the running back group at this point, to draft those guys in round 3 as well. And so I'm just going to take the best receiver for me, and that ends up being Calvin Ridley. And then it's like, oh, could I have gotten him in round 4? And that's just the gamble you have to take.
it's such a no man's land when the top 3 quarterbacks are off the board.
Yep.
There's a group of running backs that you like, but as Jamie is saying, you like them a lot better in round 4, and some of them are going to be there in round 4. And then there's this group of wide receivers because Higgins, Olave, and Smith have come off the board. We're talking about a later round 3 pick. And so, yeah, go ahead, Dan. You took Ridley in round 3 too.
That was the spot. It was the late round 3. I think it was the 10th pick overall or the 9th pick overall. And it's like, I was actually between Ridley and Keenan Allen. I like Keenan Allen a considerable amount more than I think most the consensus right now. It sounds like more than you guys like him right now. And I understand the drawback with Allen. It's more of just a floor play for me. I still think he's their go-to guy on third downs in those key spots, and he still has a very good chance of getting 100 receptions. But I think that if you're taking receiver here, you just have to understand that you're banking, like at this point of your draft, guys like Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper, for example, these are the 2 that stand out to me the most of this list. And Ridley, he's not on the graphic, but he's in this tier. Actually, let's take out Ridley for a second. Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper. You're still getting a solid floor out of those 2. Yes, there's more target competition for Amari Cooper, but he's still the number 1 guy. He's still the outside guy, and he's the only one who developed a rapport with Watson last year. And they look pretty good together. Keenan Allen, same type of situation. Yes, Quentin Johnston's there, but he's still the one who has the best rapport with Justin Herbert. Mike Williams is there, but he gets injured all the time. So I still feel like there's a solid floor with both of those players. And at this stage of my draft, I do want floor because, as you mentioned, Adam, I'm not the running backs I like in this spot, and I end up taking a lot of running backs. But like you said, some of them feel a little bit gambly. Some of them feel like, I can get them around later, and maybe I'm not picking in the downside as much here with these players. But I do feel like there's solid floor plays left, at least in Cooper and Allen.
Yeah, actually, the more and more I think about this tier, I think I really, the more I like it. I like all these guys.
I love this tier. It's just where we're drafting this tier. That's the question. That's what it comes down to. It's like, so I'll give you my dilemma in this draft yesterday, and I kind of did this on purpose because I wanted to play it out. So I started my draft at the 7th spot with Bijan Robinson and Tony Pollard fell to round 2. That's not something I expected. So when Pollard was there, I was like, okay, I'm gonna go running back. Round 3, Mark Andrews made it back to me. No brainer. I'm gonna take Mark Andrews. So now I go, okay, no wide receiver for the first 3 rounds. Then it comes to round 4, and I'm staring at Christian Watson and Jerry Jeudy, and I have Jeudy ranked ahead of Watson. So Jeudy, Watson versus Aaron Jones. And I'm like, you know what? I want to play this out. So I play it out by taking Aaron Jones in round 4. If this was a real draft, I would have taken Jeudy. But I just wanted to see how the build would work out. But that was my dilemma. And so do I take what I considered best player on the board, which is Aaron Jones?
Right.
Or do I try and just go and now focus on my receiving core? Now, the way it ended up working out for me, I thought was still pretty good because I got DK Metcalf in round 5. I still got Mike Williams. I got Jahan Dotson. I'm okay with that group, knowing how I started my team. But there's no, again, guy that I would consider to be the number 1 receiver. No lead singer, no alpha guy. And so I still think these guys could all be number 1 receivers. It's just a matter of, again, their ceiling feels a little bit capped. You say this all the time, Adam. Who's got top 10 upside? I don't know if these guys, maybe Jeudy, maybe Ridley. Keenan Allen's probably going to need to stay healthy and just, rack up catches to get there. But I think those are the guys, because I don't see Deebo Samuel, if he's not getting carries, getting there again. I don't know if Christian Watson's going to get there yet. And Amari Cooper just feels, again, like a guy like Dan said. I feel like his floor is super safe. His ceiling is just not that high. Like, I think it's a good ceiling. I just don't think it's a great ceiling.
I think people would say, well, look at the number 1 receiver for Deshaun Watson. He's always been an elite guy. And of course, yes, it was Hopkins, but it was also Will Fuller. Will Fuller was something like wide receiver 6, 7, or 8 or something like that per game. I think Will Fuller might go down as one of the most underrated receiver. Like, we just never really got to see his potential other than 1 year, and then he got busted for PEDs.
I still don't even understand what happened to him. He was like out of the NFL, but like, why?
Yeah, I don't. It's a shame. But does Cooper's just never done that? He sort of showed that potential with Dak Prescott a little bit, but why not? You know what? Maybe that's a topic for another day because we're 40 minutes in and we've only gotten to 4 tiers. So we'll explore that. We'll explore that some other time. I'm going to take a quick break here. I have a lead singer question. As Jamie said, lead singer. I have a lead singer question when we get back. All right, quick question before we get to tier 5. You wearing an Aerosmith shirt, Dan?
No. This is a New York basketball league. One of those MIC leagues I used to play in.
Okay, well, looks like Aerosmith. It should have been Aerosmith. Tier 5, DeAndre Hopkins. Before I even read this, I think there are going to be a couple names in there that you're going to say, really? Tier 5? These guys should be higher than this. But Jamie probably a little lower than consensus on Hopkins and Metcalf. So Hopkins, Drake London, Chris Godwin, DK Metcalf, and DJ Moore. Hopkins, London, Godwin, Metcalf, Moore. Jamie, do you think that's accurate? Do you think you're going to be lower on Hopkins and Metcalf than most people?
Hopkins, I think I'll probably be right around where consensus is. I think Heath said he's got him at 19 or 18, so a couple spots below. I don't think that's going to be far off. Metcalf, I'm definitely going to be the low guy on. I just see, as great as he is and as great as he should be, he's always kind of let us down a little bit. And Tyler Lockett's outperformed him, 4 of the 5 seasons that they've played together. And now you have this just ultra breakout caliber rookie wide receiver that they're throwing into the mix. I don't think he's better than Metcalf, but they've never had a third receiver like this who could, in some cases, surprise us and be the best receiver there for Seattle. So there's just a lot of potential flaws for Metcalf. I love that he led, receivers in red zone targets last year. And so hopefully those get converted to a few more touchdowns. But there's just a lot of mouths to feed in the Seattle offense and certainly in the Seattle passing game. So I don't have a problem being the low guy Metcalf. But like I said, I was thrilled to get him as my number 1 receiver in this draft yesterday, but it was around 5. I just don't think he's going to fall around 5 in most drafts.
But ideally, tier 5 for Jamie is a number 2 receiver on your roster. Like Jamie said, he went with 3 running backs and a tight end with his first 4 picks, just a sort of experiment. But Hopkins, London, Godwin, Metcalf, DJ Moore. Dan, do you see anything more than number 2 receivers here from this group?
The only chance you have to get more, you do actually have chances to get more than number 2 receivers. So this is an interesting tier. Let me start by just saying that, because in the past, I feel like this tier is a good example of how we've, as an industry, and every fantasy manager who's listening and playing along, has improved on past mistakes. In the past, I think these names would be shot way higher up the rankings, but now a lot of people can understand the flaws of playing in bad situations with bad quarterback play, and that's really what makes up this tier. Outside of DK Metcalf, who has his own concerns that Jamie went over, including the fact that the player Jamie's talking about, Jackson Smith-Njigba, outproduced Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave in their 1 season together at Ohio State, earned more targets and had more yards. And the slot is the easiest place to get targets. So I am definitely concerned because of it. The rest of these guys are all guys who could be number 1s potentially on their roster, but just have seriously bad quarterback play or situation concerns. DJ Moore, everything I read, and from Dave was at camp there, Bears camp, and Dave was saying, like, this offense is just going to go straight through DJ Moore, which is great in theory. But then you get to the games, and Justin Fields can't keep the passing game on rhythm, and there's not them. And despite the fact that he's looking for more every play, it's not happening. Same thing could happen with Godwin. Same thing could happen with Drake London. Everyone talks about, oh my God, Mariota was so. Have you seen his off-target throw percentage? Well, have you seen Desmond Ritter's? Because it wasn't much better last year either. And then you go on to DeAndre Hopkins, and that situation I think is a little bit better in my mind, just because I am a believer in Ryan Tannehill as a thrower of the football versus the rest of this crew, basically, with the exception of Geno Smith. And so I feel a little bit better, but then it's like, oh, it's Mike Vrabel. Am I really expecting a lot of targets? A similar situation, DJ Moore and Drake London there. So I don't really see too much upside in this tier in reality. But in theory, if one of these teams decided to go pass heavy or just changed it up a little bit, there are potential target hogs here. DJ Moore, maybe not Drake London with Pitts back, but Chris Godwin, DJ Moore, like DeAndre Hopkins. There's guys in this tier
but London could be, because it could be both of them.
Yeah, it could be that. And then again, you're really evolving the pass game in that scenario, which could happen.
Yeah, would you put any of these guys in the previous tier with Ridley, Keenan Allen, Judy, Cooper, Watson, and Debo?
The only one, Metcalf, I would consider, but Jamie has me concerned. I really should be considering the fact that there's just so much, and that still is a run-first team. It's Pete Carroll, so I don't want to go too crazy there. The only one I might consider putting in is Hopkins and Moore. That's it for me.
Okay. Tier 6, Christian Kirk, Terry McLaurin, Deontay Johnson, Jahan Dotson, Michael Pittman, Marquise Brown, Mike Williams, and Tyler Lockett. Big tier here.
Mm-hmm.
Are these number 2, number 3 receivers, Jamie? Christian Kirk, Terry McLaurin, Deontay Johnson, Jahan Dotson, Michael Pittman, Marquise Brown, Mike Williams, and Tyler Lockett.
And I would, I know I sent this to you this morning. I would include Brandon Ayuk in this tier as well. You'll see him at the start of the next tier, but he should be in this group. yes, these are number 2 receivers. And you've heard me say this, a few times. Like once you get almost basically to wide receiver 20, maybe you want to say 22, 23, that list until maybe the end of this list, you could flip it and I wouldn't necessarily fight you on it. There's just so much to like about this group, but there's also flaws, clearly, mostly quarterback concerns and probably target concerns, in the case of, let's say, Christian Kirk. Marquise Brown will move up if there's a healthy Kyler Murray from the start of the season. But, I think for the most part, though, these are guys that if you don't go heavy receiver and you are sort of chasing the position, these are good fallback number 2 receivers. You'd love to get them as your number 3. And in a lot of cases, if you go receiver heavy, this is your flex. And so I think this is a good place to live in PPR if you're talking about number 3 receiver, number 4 receiver, but again, a starter if you play a flex.
Typically, though, we're going to want these guys to be our number 3, right? I mean, you're saying they could be a 2, but
for sure. Yeah. I mean, look, you don't want to necessarily fall into the trap that I did yesterday or that, Dan did, but he sort of, spun it a little differently, getting receivers right after his 2 running backs. But like Chris and I, because again, Chris took a quarterback in round 3, didn't start taking receivers until round 4. I didn't start taking receivers until round 5. Ideally, you would like to have these guys as your 3rd receiver. Again, like I said, your 4th.
All right. And so again, I'm going to give Dan, you talk about this group here. It's Kirk, McLaurin, Deontay Johnson, Jahan Dotson, Pittman, Marquise Brown, Mike Williams, Tyler Lockett, and now we'll throw Brandon Ayuk in there. Look, these guys could get drafted in round 7 or 8. And last year, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Amari Cooper were all drafted in round 7 through 8. So let's not overlook this group at all. What do you think?
I like 2 players specifically in this group because of their upside. The first one I'm going to say is Michael Pittman. So with Pittman, it's a gamble. Let's be honest. But if that passing game takes off in ways we're not expecting it to, and we're not so sure that won't happen, like Shane Steichen did a really good job developing Jalen Hurts, and I don't want to give him all the credit for it, but played a role in doing really good job in developing Jalen Hurts into a much better passer than he was at any point in his career by a considerable margin. And you can even see it on the film when you watch Hurts. He's throwing with anticipation more than I had seen him at any point in his college days or in his early NFL career. So if that happens fast with Anthony Richardson, Pittman could be the go-to guy. And we know that with these like developing quarterbacks, these younger quarterbacks, sometimes they tend to lock on, or not sometimes, more often than not, they tend to lock onto one target in the passing game. And so I see upside for Pittman based on that I don't see with some of these other players here. So he would be the one I kind of feel best about. And the other one that I'm drafting a lot of, and it's maybe not as much of an upside play, but I just think he's misproperly valued this year, is Terry McLaurin. I don't really agree with him being in this group. And I know this is across the fantasy industry. This is not just Jamie's tiers. A lot of people just in the industry were getting McLaurin very late. And I understand the concerns, the quarterback situation, the fact that we really like Jahan Dotson, but he's still Terry McLaurin, and he's still one of the best separators, in my opinion, against man coverage in the entire NFL, in a top 10 group there. And that gets you targets. You earn targets when you separate from man coverage on a consistent basis, which he's done his entire NFL career to a high degree. And so I just feel like he's going to earn targets again. There's not really a ceiling there, obviously, with Sam Howell and Jahan Dotson, in the mix there. But I think you're getting good value and good floor play there.
The best that McLaurin, I don't draft. I actually haven't found myself drafting this group a lot. You pick a few guys. Like I like Christian Kirk. I love Christian Kirk.
Me either, but McLaurin's the only one I'm drafting in this group really a lot of.
Never draft McLaurin. He has not finished higher than wide receiver 20 per game in his career. The last 2 years, he's been wide receiver 34-ish and wide receiver 26 per game.
It's not great.
I don't think the floor is all that high. And I understand that he's a more talented player than what we've seen from a fantasy perspective. He's been certainly held back by the situation.
You remember what I used to say about Stephon Diggs?
Yeah.
That may just never perform, and then he got traded, and then we saw him perform.
You know what? You guys are you've changed my opinion on this, honestly, because I think Jamie, that's a good example by Jamie. And Adam, you're right. Like, I didn't realize how bad he was on that points per game. I think he's just maybe just a much better. No, not bad, but it's like you're not even like you're getting here at wide receiver 27, 28 range.
He performs more like a number 3 receiver.
Yeah,
but he has,
despite being
he has top 20 reality performances.
Yeah,
that's the thing. It's like the numbers never support, I think, the caliber of player that he is, and that probably speaks to the quarterbacks that he's played with and the offenses that he's been in. And I don't know if that's going to change. It's
right.
I don't know if we view Washington. It's a crowded group, especially if they're going to involve Antonio Gibson. Because Dotson's going to make a lot of plays. He really sort of just scratched the surface a little bit last year, understandably so as a rookie, but he missed a lot of time, and so if he plays a full season and the touchdowns sort of get spread out a little bit, but the other raw numbers come up, just in terms of his catches and his yards, Curtis Samuel's not going away.
Exactly.
They're going to use their tight ends, and that's part of it. It's like they have a pretty big group, and now you have a young quarterback that they're asking, to sort of support all these guys, and it's a guy that's going to run more than we probably anticipate, or at least if you haven't been following it. He was an 800-yard rusher. I know we've talked about this a lot on our show, but Sam Howell ran for 800 yards in North Carolina, so he may take off a little bit more. So I believe me, I struggle with Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson. I think the upside for both of them is there. Collectively, however, I think they just bring each other down.
Yeah.
I think Jamie has them in the same tier, but they're not really being drafted that way. So it just makes so much more sense to wait 3 rounds, basically, to draft Jahan Dotson if you want a piece of that passing game. And I guess, Jamie, if I look at your tiers, the reason maybe why I said I don't draft tier 6 much, which is what we just talked about, I actually think I maybe like some of the guys in tier 7 better than tier 6. I certainly don't mean that as a criticism. I mean, nobody's going to have all these guys ranked differently. But to me, maybe there's not a huge difference because tier 7 is Mike Evans, Jordan Addison, George Pickens, and Gabe Davis. These guys are number 2 receivers on their respective teams. For Addison and Davis, you could be talking about teams that are top 5 in passing yards this year. But it's Evans, Addison, Pickens, and Gabe Davis. Why are they a tier lower than the guys we talked about? Kirk, McLaurin, Deontay, Jahan Dotson, Pittman, Marquise Brown, Mike Williams, Tyler Lockett, Brandon Ayuk.
Again, when we start to lump these guys together, did you want a 20 tier, a 20 group tier? Because I could have done that to you. And I'm not saying this to be critical. I'm just saying that's how I feel about these guys. They're if I was doing projections, they'd be decimal points apart from each other. They're that close. And again, they have their flaws, they have their upside. Evans, if we get a surprise season from Baker Mayfield, he's gonna be one of the best values that we saw. Gabe Davis, I was just reading a story in The Athletic. They did I think it's a 10-part series from Joe Buscaglia, who does a great job covering the Bills, breaking down all their position groups, and that this is a huge year for Gabe Davis. And I feel like he's going to be one of my favorite draft targets because he's in a contract year. He's one of these guys, 25 years old, with speed. If he hits the market, I mean, you saw what Marquez Valdez-Scantling got paid. This guy's got a chance to, get a huge deal, probably get overpaid, but, get a huge deal from a team that looking for speed. He's a very good blocking wide receiver. I know we don't talk about that in fantasy, but that's a big part of his value. And this is a huge year for him, and part of the story was we've illustrated this a lot. The ankle injury that he suffered prior to week 2, he missed out on probably a huge game because if you remember, that was the game Stephon Diggs just absolutely obliterated the Titans when their secondary was a joke. He came back early from that, and Joe did a good job illustrating this in the story, that he was playing 80% of the snaps right away, and was not 100%. And then right when he finally started getting healthy, then Josh Allen hurts his elbow, and the passing game, especially the downfield throw, is not the same.
Right.
So you're talking about a guy that they did not get DeAndre Hopkins. They went out and drafted a tight end, so more of an interior player, as much as they'll move Dalton Kincaid around. Khalil Shakir, Trent Sherfield, these are guys competing for mostly slot opportunities. It's Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis. And as much as you want to say they'll run the ball more, as much as you want to say that, Kincaid's going to make plays, he should have the year that we were hoping for last year if he stays healthy and Allen stays healthy. And so, I'm with you. This is a great group to target. It's a great group, again, if you're looking to get a flex wide receiver. These are the type of guys you're looking at. So, yeah, I love this group as well.
Okay. And probably, you might, I don't know if you're going to feel differently about them than we are about tier 8. Let's find out. Tier 8, Jamison Williams, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Brandon Cooks, Juju Smith-Schuster, Treylon Burks. Do I have the sad Trump? Yeah. And Michael Thomas. Although it is funny that, if people are really concerned about DeAndre Hopkins holding up, then, maybe Treylon Burks ends up being a huge steal. But
what do you mean hold up? Injuries?
Yeah. Because he has dealt with it 2 years in a row now. Although there was some question marks about whether he was really hurt at the end of last year. But tier 8 is Jamison Williams, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Brandon Cooks, Juju Smith-Schuster, Treylon Burks, and Michael Thomas. Dan, what do you think about tier 8?
I think you can start to see, just based off the last tier, we were talking about so much excitement around them. And I feel like even in that last tier, there are 2 guys that were definitely higher on my board than the others, but you can start to see the drop off here clearly here, right? Like we're talking about guys like there's only one player I'm targeting in this entire. I was targeting a lot of Treylon Burks, but now Obviously, that was before the DeAndre Hopkins news. I've lost almost all of my enthusiasm in Treylon Burks, sadly, just based on how I think that offense will work. But, looking at this tier, the only guy I'm targeting, the only guy I'm ending up with any of my rosters is Brandon Cooks, who I love this year from a fantasy standpoint. But the rest of this tier, like Jameson Williams, we're missing 6 games. He comes back. I don't know his role in the offense. Juju Smith-Schuster, I'm not going into that. I'm just not doing that again. I did it last year on the Chiefs on a couple of rosters, and I was disappointed. There's no shot I'm now going. He's going to the Patriots, and there's no shot I'm going to now jump in. Michael Thomas, I just don't think will stay healthy at any point in his career at this point with the way that his what is it, his foot or his ankle, whatever it is, it's been so messed up down there so many times. I'm just I doubt he's returning to form. So I just find a struggle here to find any excitement about anyone in this group besides Cooks.
Jamie, with Treylon Burks, he's probably going to be somewhere around wide receiver 40. I mean, we're 40 deep at this point, something like that.
Yeah, we're deep at this point. This is you're into the back. These guys aren't starting most likely on your roster,
right? And I actually think if he's a good player, which we think he is,
right?
I don't think he's just going to be, a complete afterthought. He could still.
But it's probably going to be a lot of 3 for 49 or 4 for 60 type games where it's
again, if you want to just make comparisons, it's not apples to apples, but in the best year for AJ Brown, I believe it was 2020 from just a raw number standpoint, forget about what the projected totals. Corey Davis that season averaged over 13 PPR points per game. He had 65 catches. It was just around 100 targets.
Yeah.
So could he do that? Sure. I don't think that's, out of the realm of possibility for a player of his caliber that should make a lot of big plays, that he doesn't need to be a 120 plus target guy or 150 target guy, so he could certainly get his production that way. And then you factor in, again, the potential injuries or pitfalls for DeAndre Hopkins. I know for me, because I've been on CBS Sports HQ, I've said it here, we did our emergency podcast. I wrote the story about DeAndre Hopkins. I've gotten a lot of pushback on why are you so down on Treylon Burks? It's just the raw targets for what this team is. They just, 25, 30, and 30 in the last 3 years from a pass attempt standpoint. And so when you just start to look at that alone,
right?
If he was established already, then you could say, okay, he'll be able to do this. So you're projecting him to take a leap, and now you're projecting him to take a leap on a low volume pass attack. And again, Tim Kelly, the offense coordinator, may change things. It may just be something completely different than we've ever seen, but that's hard to expect when Derrick Henry's still there. So you're expecting the projected leap on a low volume passing attack. Right. When they just bring in DeAndre Hopkins. And let's not rule out, they still have guys that they like. We may like him much better. Burks over Chigo Okonkwo and Kyle Phillips. Those guys will still get some opportunities as well. Again, the whole pie just got smaller for everybody not named DeAndre Hopkins, if he's still DeAndre Hopkins. And that's the question.
And the other issue there, for me at least, is you mentioned reference the 2020 season where they were actually able to get 2 relevant fantasy receivers out of that offense. But it was a career year for Tannehill as a passer. He had 33 touchdowns, only 7 interceptions, for over, let's see what it was. It was over 4,000 or just under 4,000 yards. This is not. Are we sure Tannehill's going to get back to that level at this point? And are even worse than that, for me at least, with this situation is, are we sure we're going to get Tannehill the whole year? Because I sure as hell need it if I want any part of that Titans pass game. Because I think the moment they turn to Levis, we're looking at 120 yards passing a game. Because look at what Levis did in the SEC last year. He barely broke 200.
Too low. Yeah, 120 passing yards a game. I know.
Here we go. I'm gonna show you something that's gonna shock you.
He was hurt all year. He was hurt all year. Why do you only focus on Will Levis? Will Levis played through injury all year.
Oh God, played through injury. Everyone plays through injury.
The year before, look what he did.
I'm about to give you some stats that are going to.
I think before you get there, though, Dan, just one point though about Tannehill. I don't think they make this move to get DeAndre Hopkins if they're turning to Will Levis, barring an injury. I think this is we've now seen the Titans. Okay, they look at it, and I know you brought this up, Adam. We talked about this with Heath a little bit. They look at it as they were a game away from still winning the division, as disastrous as the season was last year. And that while everybody's anointing Jacksonville, and believe me, I'm one of those people, I think Jacksonville wins the division. But is Jacksonville right now that much better? I think you could say personnel-wise, yes. But from just team versus team, I don't know if Jacksonville's running away with the division. And so now Tennessee has a chance, based on improving their receiving core, if their defense can hold up with what they're able to do and how they win, the way that Mike Vrabel's gotten wins, they'll be right there. I don't think they're they're looking at it as we're rebuilding. You know, they drafted Will Levis, I think, to be their quarterback of the future. And obviously, if the season goes in the tank because Henry gets hurt and, you know, Tannehill struggles or gets hurt, then Will Levis will be the guy. But I don't think we're going to see Will Levis based on a hey, guess what? We're throwing the cards on the table.
And I think Jamie made a good enough point there that I will just bow out and I won't bury Adam with the stats here because he was about to get just absolutely buried because I don't know what Levis's injury was, but I don't think it was arm related. I'm pretty sure it was lower half. And so that's
toe, I think.
Yeah, so that shouldn't affect him throwing that much. And I was just gonna bury him. There was a game where he had 27 pass attempts and threw for 98 yards.
I just don't understand why you are
98 yards on 27 pass attempts. Look at some of these yardage totals. They're insane. This is college football. 188 against a Louisville defense, 109 against Vanderbilt. Like, what are we talking about?
Obviously, he was not right. I believe their offensive line was.
He had offensive line concerns, receiver concerns.
Who doesn't?
Coaching concerns. There are a lot of things working against him. Now, the great ones typically tend to do better than what Dan is illustrating, because that's where guys typically tend to outperform. But
yeah, it's fine.
Levis cannot throw the football.
There's a reason why Will Levis fell to where he fell.
Look, I just don't understand. I just don't understand why, if you're going to analyze a player, why you're completely ignoring the previous year, as if it did not exist.
That's it. I'm picking up the last year's game lot to 2020.
Oh, I don't care about
it. Wasn't that good? Because it wasn't that good.
Oh, the year before that? You mean 2020?
The year before that was not that good. His healthy year, 149 yards passing against Louisville, 177 against Vanderbilt,
how many
150 against Mississippi State,
how
192 against Georgia, 145 against LSU, 87 against Florida, 102 against South Carolina, 179 against Missouri. I mean, he had 367 against Louisiana Monroe. Good job there. 254 against Chattanooga. Good job there. But I mean, that's what we're talking about, is highs there.
All right. If he starts, he's going to throw for more than 125 yards per game. I'll take the over. All right. We are going overtime. We're going overtime today. We haven't talked about a Chiefs receiver yet. So let's get to tier 9, which has 2 Chiefs receivers. And Jamie has moved Sky Moore. They're back-to-back. Moore and Kadarius Toney. But Jamie's going to be lower on Toney than consensus, at least as of right now. Nico Collins, Elijah Moore, Romeo Doubs, Quentin Johnston, Rashad Bateman, and Cortland Sutton. Sky Moore, Kadarius Toney, Nico Collins, Elijah Moore, Romeo Doubs, Quentin Johnston, Rashad Bateman, and Cortland Sutton. Jamie, is this a vomit noise type of tier, or yeah? Okay, no, it's not, according to Dan.
No, I love this tier. I love this group. So I think when you I don't want to say just because you miss on wide receivers, these are the group of guys that you should be targeting, but this is a great group to get your 4th receiver, your 5th receiver, guys that you want to take a swing at the fence at, just because if they hit, they're going to hit in a big way. Let's say like Quentin Johnston, for example, if there is no Mike Williams for a stretch of games, or even Keenan Allen for a stretch of games. But Nico Collins, I think, could, be the lead guy there for the Texans, and this is going to be another team. We look at what the 49ers, and we just marvel at how they get guys open. Well, the passing game coordinator from last year is now the offense coordinator in Houston. And so CJ Stroud is any good. And I think Nico Collins has a chance to, be that 3rd-year breakout. I wrote about 3rd-year wide receivers. We talk about who's going to be the breakout type of guys. He's one of those guys. Romeo Doubs, you look at what he was able to accomplish in the first 4 games last year. He's going to be the 2nd guy on the, team in terms of targets behind Christian Watson. But this is a guy that's gotten a lot of rave reviews. I think you look at the Chiefs guys, obviously somebody's going to emerge from one of these two, and hopefully both. But, I think if you're banking on role, I'll take the slot receiver, which is going to be Sky Moore. If you're banking on, health, I'll take Sky Moore. Elijah Moore was great as a rookie, got in the doghouse last year. Now he gets a new opportunity with the Browns. He could be, a special type of player. So yeah, I love this tier, and again, and this is kind of the struggle when you do rankings and tiers, and even when you draft, do you take the chance on Juju Smith-Schuster, who could get a lot of targets in New England, or do you pass on him and take, let's say, the upside of somebody in this group? And that's just, I think, how you have to approach the floor versus ceiling, and which guy could be better.
Yeah, somebody in our chat says sky is the limit, as in Sky Moore. And it just reminds me that Dan Schneider has never come up with a good team name, like once.
What are you talking about?
You never come up with a good team name. Yeah, and in our baseball league, I think your team name is just Dan.
No, it was a pun last. First of all, you take way too much joy in like coming up with your little puns. And I'm not even the best one you ever had. I think Jamie came up with, to be honest, from what I heard behind the scenes, the Alex Menorah.
No, first of all, his name is Alec. You write a newsletter every day, and you can't even know the guy's name is Alec Manoah. And I think I came up with Alec Menorah. Jamie, did I come up with that?
I think it was Jamie.
We've had a lot of good ones over the years.
I'm talking about football team.
I'll impress you. I'll impress you with a football team.
I came up with
okay?
Stephon Diggs, Laura Winslow.
I think I had some good ones too.
Right,
You also had like Oil of Olave.
Oil
You have like horrible misses at times.
You don't. It's not a miss. Oil of Olave is.
No one liked that one.
Everyone liked that one.
Everyone.
Do a poll. Do a quick poll.
You don't even try. You don't even try.
And see if anyone even knows the reference of Oil of Olave.
Yo, you don't. Do you have an older sibling?
No.
Okay, well that's a problem. Not only are you younger, you don't have
a young audience, Adam.
Just gonna leave it with Ethan.
Thank you, Ethan Dixon. This is a rare time when Adam puts up a bad comment about himself on the YouTube. He's really usually just like maneuvers it and manipulates the YouTube comments and only puts up the good ones about himself, the flattering ones.
Ethan doesn't even know what oil of Olay is.
No one does. That's the point.
It shouldn't have been Olave oil.
Right, that's the question.
Olive oil. I'm going with oil of Olay.
Somehow, Matt, it's not a play on olive oil. It's like this dumb commercial that he saw once in his life that no one follows or cares about, and is not relevant at all in 2023.
Okay, I'm gonna leave you with this take that I know is gonna piss Dan off.
Oh God.
Episode 3, I believe, of that video game show that I never finished. The Last of Us.
The Last of Us.
The episode 3, the one with Ron Swanson. Was that episode?
Yeah, that was good.
Episode 3, extremely overrated just because it was Ron Swanson.
No.
You on that? A good episode, but overrated because it was Ron Swanson. Talk to you later, everybody.